Hello, and thank you for joining me. So, I spent about the last 20 minutes in a pretty heated debate with members of the Green Party. And basically, this was from an advertisement that they were running. And actually, the debate was nothing to do with the advertisement. I had basically laid out my views on the Green Party. I think they have some pretty reckless policies. One area I particularly uneasy with the Greens, and that's an understatement, is on crime. Anyway, I got into a back and forth with Green Party members over what is and isn't their positions, and basically we have diametrically opposed views. I believe they're way too soft on crime. I believe their whole attitude is wrong, and they were accusing me of misrepresenting it. But this is something I quoted directly. This is from their 2015. I'm guessing it's a white paper. It's their online material anyway. And this is from the section on crime. You can't find this on Facebook because they don't talk about it on Facebook. But this is type in the Green Party of England and Wales crime, and this should come up. CJ 206. Now, this is one of many points they're making, but this to me really symbolises what they stand for. CJ 206. This is a direct quote. To ensure that if an offender has to be detained, the purpose of detention is not to punish, humiliate, or degrade him/her, but to protect society or the offender/her himself, while maintaining his/her dignity and human rights. I'm going to read that again. To ensure that if an offender has to be detained, the purpose of detention is not to punish, humiliate, or degrade him/her, but to protect society or the offender/her himself, while maintaining his/her dignity and human rights. Now, the segment on humiliate or degrade, I have no opposition to that. I've never been I've never been supportive of humiliating punishments insofar as degrading someone, but they have explicitly said there the purpose of detention is not to punish, humiliate, or degrade. Not to punish. Now, when I raised this point, they said, "Oh, it's I was taken out of context, and it was all about punishment for the sake of punishment." But I basically have a very solid approach based on absolute conviction with this, and that is that people who cannot bring themselves to understand that where there is damaging acts in society, such as criminal acts, that there should not be consequences for that. People who cannot grasp that with those sort of crimes, with the most serious sort of crimes, such as rape, such as GBH, such as arson, people who cannot bring themselves to accept that the offender needs to face consequences for that sort of crime, to me, those people have zero moral credibility. But I want to discuss a little bit why I have such strong views on crime. And I don't believe that my views are unreasonable. I don't believe that my views are extreme, but they are definitely very strong. When I was about 15, 16, I was forced out of my home by local yobs, local gangs. Now, these aren't like big, well-known gangs. They were relatively small scale, but they were very unpleasant people who made our lives a misery. For about 2 years, they would put bricks in our windows. They would attack us in the street, just basically made our lives a misery for no other reason than we were outsiders. We come from Northern Ireland, and we had settled in this inner city area in England. I don't want to be too specific because people might get the wrong idea and think I'm trying to badmouth the city I'm in and whatever. Anyway, suffice to say, we were outsiders, and it was a very unpleasant experience. When I first arrived there, it was no big problem, but people they could tell we were outsiders. They went out of the way to give us a hard time, and it was deeply unpleasant. The feeling of being frightened to leave your own home. And I've never forgotten that. I'm 31 now, so we're talking 15 years ago. But I've never forgotten the sense of fear, the sense of mental anguish, and the stress that it caused. I've had situations of crime since then, but nothing quite on that scale. I mean, that sort of crime is different from getting something stolen, which is shit. But that sort of crime whereby you're literally a prisoner in your own house, fearing to leave your own house in case something happens, is truly profound in its implications. And this is something that many people across the UK have to go through. We have a real problem in this country with this sort of destructive job culture. Um, we got out, but there've been other people who have not had that sort of escape. There have been people I've heard about who have literally ended up either taking their own lives or being hounded to death by these sort of thugs. So when I see people putting such a focus on trying to understand the criminal, putting such a focus on being opposed to punishment, I frankly feel enraged because it brings back the memory of what I went through. And it is basically, as far as I'm concerned, it's a display of thorough ignorance. Very often, these people come from a point of pontificating how wise they are and how much they know about crime. But in most circumstances, very, 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 very few people who've been through what I've been through, and there's been people who've been through much worse than me, but very few people who've been through that experience would ever endorse a mindset that says a criminal is not responsible for his or her actions. And what really frustrates me is that if you believe in fairness, if you believe in justice, they present that as being hardline for the sake of it. Um, they just fail to understand that it isn't about revenge. It's about fairness. It's about fairness. And I find myself having very, very little patience with people who cannot understand this, who think that the entire attitude to crime should be focusing on what are the rights of the criminal. I mean, you can support rehabilitation whilst also supporting punishment. I do not see those two as opposed. But the sort of people I am talking about, they are just so out of touch with reality. They just don't understand what this is like to to go through an experience like that. And I would suggest that they are callous because they don't try to understand. They have a callous disregard for the way that victims of this sort of serious crime feel. Now, I know what people are going to say. You get people who have been through serious crime and they're forgiving and so on. Well, that's their business. But most people, most people who have been through this experience, they're not they're not vengeance-filled people. They're just normal people who want justice, who want fairness. And what this neoliberal attitude to crime utterly fails to understand is that you cannot have closure without punishment. You just can't. They often quote the Nordic penal system as if it's a wonderful system. That system is often hailed by liberals as being great because the Nordic countries have relatively low crime rates. But for me, that is not the only issue. It's a very important issue. I grant that, of course it is, but justice has to include holding offenders to account. And the Nordic system is not without its critics, including within Scandinavia. So, this way that they hold it up to be a perfect system is misleading. You see, I do not want sadistic prisons where inmates are tortured or, that sort of approach. That's not what I'm calling for. What I'm calling for is basic fairness. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but I just cannot understand the mentality. Well, I do sort of understand it. I think it's a lack of empathy because they've never been through it. But it's that failure to even try to understand, because they think if you're angry about this, then you're an extremist, as if minding your own business and having some thug assault you for no reason, you should be calm about that. Like that shouldn't have some sort of impact on your philosophy. They're so ignorant and so pompous in their utter failure to understand this. Anyway, I'll leave it there, because it just go round in circles. But that's basically why I feel as strongly about crime as I do. I have no patience with people who say that the entire focus on crime should be on rehabilitation, or against punishment. The Greens, as a party, are opposed to punishment. They've made that clear, and thankfully they'll never be in a position of significant power. But they should come clean.